Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to today's panel discussion. I'm John Smalley and MA Librarian with the Humanities Center here at the main library. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our community. On behalf of the public library, we wish to welcome you to the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this territory, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as caretakers of this place. As guests, we who reside in their traditional territory recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. Today's program is part of the library's Everybody's Climate program series, a series that we hope will inspire you to take action for a safer, greener, and more sustainable future. If you want to learn more about the Everybody's Climate series, you can pick up one of these blue booklets from the table on your right, where you will also find coffee and cookies. Please help yourself to that. If you don't mind, when you leave today, perhaps you could leave us some feedback. I put these flyers on the wall by the coffee table with a QR code. You can scan that and leave us your comments or suggestions. You can also find out about our events by checking our online events calendar on the website sfpl.org. So we are honored today to have our two panelists, Kim Shuck and Gregg Castro. I want to just say a few words about each of them. Kim, as many of you know, was San Francisco's Poet Laureate, and her poetry draws on her multi-ethnic background, which includes Polish and Cherokee heritage. She's hosted scores of writing workshops and art workshops for all ages throughout the city. And she's also worked with the library and the San Francisco Arts Commission to launch major citywide initiatives to honor Native American Indigenous Peoples' heritage. Gregg Castro is the culture director of the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, and he advises for the people on the traditional homelands of the San Francisco Peninsula. He's a writer-activist working in the California Indigenous Peoples community, and he has also for many decades worked to explore his own Salinan and Ohlone heritage. Both Gregg and Kim were part of a panel, an amazing panel last July as part of last year's Everybody's Climate program, and I'm delighted that they both agreed to come back this year. So thank you, Kim and Gregg, and that concludes my comments. Please, everyone, give a warm welcome to Gregg Castro and Kim Shuck.
Thank you so much. To throw no shade on the library, but I have a love-hate relationship with land acknowledgements, and I'll tell you why. I think people don't always understand what they mean. For example, I'm Aniwi Cherokee, and my people are from 3,000 miles to the east of here. So this is not my ancestral homeland. I was born in San Francisco. I am a Western Hemispherian, but I'm not a local Western Hemispherian. But on my mother's side of the family's lived here for 5 generations. So I could take you, for example, to go have tea in a coffee shop that sits above a culverted part of Mission Creek. And if it had rained a lot that week, you'd be able to hear the creek. I know the place because I have generational information about it. Imagine how much more generational information there is from a family that's been here, evolved with the things that used to grow here, and some of them still do, participated in sacred responsibilities that involve these hills. There is information that's key information about these places that people still hold. And that's what the land acknowledgement in part means, is that there are people who evolved here, and in an environment where people want to treat this place like it's a rainforest when it's actually semi-arid, some of that knowledge is important to have and access. I know you kind of also have a relationship with the land acknowledgement, so I'm going to kick it over to Gregg now. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kim, and thanks to the library and our guests here out in the audience for being here. Yeah, I think across all of Indian country, as we use that term, tribes have a wide breadth and depth of their feelings about land acknowledgements, and a lot of them refuse to do them whatsoever. For their own reasons. And the thing is, they're all valid reasons for the most part. For our, the way we evolved, and it did change over time because we started about 7 years ago, and it started as a fad. It was faddish. And I was, it's part of my job with our nonprofit was, for a couple of months, I was cranking them out because we were getting so many. We were literally getting dozens a week. Again, it was a fad at that point, and they just wanted something to say. And what we did, and I credit Jonathan Cordero, our tribal chair, executive director over a nonprofit, he kind of pushed back on them and me. It's like, remember, it's not for us. We know where we're getting from. We know who we are. We know where we're at. It's for them to remember, and whenever they say it, they should remember, but it shouldn't stop there. That was the key part. Land acknowledgement is a process, not a statement, not a saying. And I can just imagine that, in 10 years, some city commission is going to make some clerk who just got hired stand up and say, now I have to say the land acknowledgement of the San Francisco blah, blah, blah commission. I mean, what honor and integrity is there in that? I think culturally and spiritually, when we say something, we want to mean it. When other people say things about us, we want them to mean it. So we have evolved over the last several years of working with institutions to make them mean it. It's like, why are you doing it? And how does that affect what you're doing on a daily basis? And so for the public library, it's like, that's why we're here. I've done several panels here, been participated in a number of events, and that's part of that process. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Doesn't have to be financial, although if you have any loose change in your couch, send it our way, we could use it. But the point is that it's a relationship, an ongoing, dynamic, hopefully beneficial to both sides relationship. And the beginning of it is a land acknowledgement, but it shouldn't be the end. And that's where we are with land acknowledgements. It is a love-hate relationship. I mean, if they don't want to do a land acknowledgement but still want a relationship, we'll do that, and we've done that in the past if they don't want to go through that process. So we're flexible that way, but it's the relationship and what they do in our community and for our community. That's what's the essential to that whole relationship. And if it has a land acknowledgement, cool, but it isn't a requirement.
So I think, from my perspective, from my community, and I'll ask you to respond to this, I think one of the biggest problems that we have right now, one of the two that gets my biggest focus, is the alienation of the kids from the land. The way that they do not feel as connected to the land base as I was raised. I don't know how you were raised, but I was raised that way, even in the middle of a city. Yeah. So, Native kids have a really high suicide rate. And so I've been delighted over the last, I want to say 5 years, but I'm not really sure when Karina started doing the work on the land over in Sigoriate. I know it's a little longer than that, but
it was about 12, 15 years ago.
About 12, 15 years. That there are a number of projects that bring local indigenous kids into land-based practice where they're tending plants and learning about them, but not just that, also connecting with elders. It's a multi-generational process. And now it's not just Sigourney, it's also other things that have started up. And I think it seems to be working. You know, it seems to be helping kids reconnect, and not just the kids, but the elders as well, because those are the two groups that most get alienated within this cultural context. So
Yeah, and we realize that we've been working on a number of fronts with our limited resources, but we have some projects and plans and hopes to address that. You know, yeah, I work with the American Indian Cultural District. I'm on the Leadership Council, and that's something we understand, that, you know, the mostly relocated Native community that's here is mostly in the Mission District. That's the cultural district boundaries, are officially and technically the Mission District, but obviously it's all Native land, and our Native people, including Native relatives, are, you know, all over this city. So we don't limit ourselves to our cultural district. And within that cultural district, though, isn't that much greenery that you can touch, and some of it that is there is kind of, I don't want to say artificial, but it wasn't there before, you know, so that's a little
also potentially funky.
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, it's relatively new, and you don't know what got put there. So, you know, and there's people, especially young people, that never get out of there. I mean, they don't go to the beach. They don't go to Golden Gate Park. They don't go to those places to touch the ground. They're basically, you know, encapsulated in concrete and cement and asphalt, especially in the Mission District. So there is a hope that we're going to have some sort of indigenous place in the Golden Gate Park. We're working with the city on that, partnership with the Friendship House. I don't want to give too much away. It's not that it's a secret, but it's still in flux. But the goal and the idea is that to get our people, kids, but also elders, but especially for the Friendship House, who works with people in recovery, getting them to touch the ground, putting their hands in the ground, putting their feet in the ground. There's several things we're going to, hopefully accomplish at that place in Golden Gate Park, but the idea is all centered around reconnecting with Mother Earth. That connection's already there, but it's, faded and stretched out and broken in some cases. How do we reestablish that? It's through getting people out there to remember who they are and where they came from. And they came from the earth. Wherever they may not be this earth, but they came from the earth. That's what virtually every origin story of every Native culture that I'm aware of talks about. We came from the earth. We're literally made for the earth. My father is Salinan, which is south of the Ohlone, about a couple hours drive south of here. And our sacred mountain is in national forest at the moment. But our stories say we were brought into the world at the base of that mountain. And we were made from the elements that grew around there, elderberry. And that's what this clapper stick is made out of, elderberry. And there's elderberry all around that mountain still to this day. And we're made from it. And people think that's weird. It's like, well, have you read your Bible, Genesis? You guys are all made of clay, by the way. That's what you guys say. Why is that different? You're made of the earth you came from. It's just very far away, but you're made of the earth too. That's a very common understanding. Somehow that doesn't resonate with a lot of people, but for us it does. And the fact that we're cut off from it, especially here in Ramaytush country, right? All of our people were basically removed or pushed out and chased out, those that survived. And we're talking 80 to 90% did not survive that 100 years of colonization from when Portola first got here, the creation of the city, going through the mission system, going through the Mexican period, going through statehood, gold rush. Within 100 years, by 1870, there's virtually no Ramaytush people on the census. We all got pushed out, the survivors. And there's a reason for it, because we were outlawed. We were basically, it was a death sentence to be Native for a significant part of our early statehood.
So on the subject of the death sentence, for people who might not know, by death sentence, you mean there's literally a bounty on Native heads.
Native, and it was well documented.
Yeah.
That's the people that, in a Native view, it was relatively recent. In contemporary society that doesn't understand time and history, it's a long time ago. So it's like in a vague fog to them. But if you look at the information at the time, how blatant the hatred for Native people was, right? Literally headlines in the paper saying, kill the Indians. Celebrating posses returning from basically wiping out entire villages, massacring them. And in most cases, it was women, children, and elders in brutal fashion. And it was paid for by the government at the state and the federal level. People don't understand how blatant that was. If you raised your voice against it, you were vilified in the community. This is the 1850s to the 1870s. That's why we left. I mean, especially in San Francisco with the gold rush, we went from 3,000 to 120,000, in 2 years or something? I don't remember the numbers, but
3 years, yeah.
yeah, it was like massive. And of course, the gold rush, for us, they rushed right over us and pushed us. And there's all kinds of stories. You can read about them online. American Genocide, California Catastrophe, written by, professor at UCLA State, an historian who looked at the documents because there was no embarrassment at the time for this to happen.
Well, I got into it one time with a guy where I was saying, the nutritional content of what the missions fed the neophytes was the equivalent of a cup of milk a day, and they'd work them to death. And this guy goes, well, that's your opinion. I'm like, oh, no, it's not my opinion. The Catholic Church is incredibly good at keeping track, and it's really detailed. I mean, you can even, the last time I was there, if you went to the Soledad mission, you could look through the case at one of the pages, and it says it. It's right there.
Again, it's the blatantness of it. People don't understand that. They thought it was like, people say that, well, you died mostly of disease. You need to go further in that. The reason we died mostly of disease in the mission system is because the people were locked up at night. And if one person got sick in that room, they all got sick. And because of the poor health conditions, they had no immunity against it. So you had vast numbers of people dying. Literally, it's in some missions, the death records, again, they were not embarrassed about it. They wrote down every little part. So there was like 2 or 3 burials a day.
Yeah.
And two of them would probably be kids. The average lifespan was, I think, averaged across, Jonathan's done the statistics, 9 years. But I think in Mission Dolores, our local one, 4.5.
Yeah.
And most of them were kids.
And that's not even considering the people who got sent to San Rafael, where the hospital was.
Yeah.
So fewer people died here just simply because if they got sick, they'd be shipped over to San Rafael Mission, and so the numbers are skewed low. But I did a poetry project at one point where I went to each of the missions and took a little water from there and wrote a poem at each one of the missions. And at one point, with Mary Jean, and at one point we hit the Santa Barbara mission right in the middle of that field trip that every California child has to take. So there were something like 3,000 kids, elementary school kids there. So they had been burning some kind of really thick incense in the church, and so we ended up in the graveyard, and this little flock of children come out, and this one kid looks at the cenotaph for the deceased Native people from that area, and he reads it and he goes, "That's a huge number," and the guide said, "Well, these people lived a subsistence lifestyle, which means that they were eating things that weren't very good for them and didn't make them healthy." And he thought about it for a minute and he went, "How are there so many of them then?" And I'm just sitting there going, I don't have to add anything to this. This guy's got it all the way handled. And then she, in order to change the subject, they had apparently just read Island of the Blue Dolphin, and her grave site is there. And so she shows them the grave site, and the kid goes, so did they know that people were dying of the diseases really quickly when they took her off the island and made her sick? It's like, mic drop. It's like, those are the allies you want, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that's a different sea change over the generations of people actually like wondering about those things. Because when I was growing up, they didn't wonder at all. They just, oh, those poor Indians, they came and, you know, the Spaniards came and saved them from their savagery, and then the missions got built. Usually they say the Spaniards built the missions, they didn't. And then all of a sudden disappear. The natives just aren't there. They don't say they went away even. They just don't talk about them anymore. There's not in the record at all. And to bring it back to the discussion, part of the reason why they died in such massive numbers is because they were taken out of their natural environment. Yeah. We are meant to be in the places we were put by Creator. We're bound by spiritual, cultural, and physical values, right? We're made of the material from that place. And our spiritual beliefs say we were put there for a reason to take care of that place. That's why we're brought into the world. That's part of what they said about the land acknowledgement. We haven't forgotten our sacred obligations given us by Creator. Some people call them the original instructions in English, to take care of that place. Even though we're not here anymore. We haven't been here since, 1870s. We all fled to other places, other parts of the country, but a lot of us went to the Central Valley or south of the Salinas Valley in the 19th century to work in the fields, to work in agriculture, and get away from the city where it was literally dangerous for us to be. And we had already died to 90% of us were already gone. Taking us out of the environment, and the environment itself changed, right? Because the city grew very fast. So those natural places we would be at to gather the materials and the food that we had existed quite well on for thousands of years. So there goes that argument. Like, how do we keep going for thousands of years? We did quite well. And if you look at the historical record, what you actually see is that we saved the Spaniards. They didn't save us, right? Those expeditions coming up here, I can imagine our elders were just laughing at them. It's like, you're starving, but you're walking all over food. Yeah. You're literally walking through it, it's trampled on it, and you're dying because you won't eat it, right? The Portola expedition has that in one of their diaries. They just south of here along the coast, when they were coming up, they stopped and camped because they expected 1 to 3 of their people to die. Yeah. And then they finally ate some local berries. Turns out they had scurvy. Right. When a couple of days they're up, and they kept on going. But it was there all along.
There is that scurvy story about these people are dying, their teeth are loose, they're bleeding from the gums, they've got scurvy. Yeah. And this old woman picks a handful of sour grass and hands it to this one guy. And the notation, and it's very lovely that these people are handing us flowers. It's like, no, she's trying to save your life.
Yes, put it in your mouth. Don't just look at it.
Like, chew the stems of the, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so these connections are intense. I mean, when I was a kid, I still saw San Francisco garter snakes playing dead in the gutters on the street. And you don't see that anymore at all. But you'd see them. They'd be hanging out there implausibly pretending to be, to be deceased. Or anytime I'd move a potted plant in my parents' garden, there'd be the California slender salamanders underneath it. And then they went way down for a minute. And I had done a project in the Presidio, which you can still actually go do on your phone. It's called Crossing Waterways, Crossing Time, when they were daylighting the Tennessee watershed, where they were, when I first went there, they said to me, oh, well, the green bees are extinct now. The green bees are extinct, huh? Well, about 3 weeks later, somebody found one of the green bees. You know, you have to encourage them. My grandmother, my Polish grandmother, by the way, taught me that if there's a butterfly that used to be in the yard and isn't there now, you got to plant the thing that they eat,
Yeah.
right? So I did this project over the course of a year, and you never saw any checker spot butterflies in the Presidio. You never saw them.
Yeah.
Then they reclaimed that bit of marshland, and I was there one morning, and I used to get there before the sun would crest the hill. The sun came up over the hill, and about 10 minutes later, there was 1,000 checker spot butterflies all over the boardwalk there. These things are not reversible. They just take will. You get to keep the things you invest in.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know from my own experience that it's a painful thing to not be able to support, defend, and cater to the biome where my people are from. And it's a constant source of agony. San Francisco Bay Area has one of the largest, most diverse populations of indigenous people from this part of the world.
Yeah.
And that's because of the relocation project, which was a project intended to move people away from their land base. So you don't get as many Ohlone here, but you do get a whole lot of everybody
Lots of
else.
liberals, yeah. Yeah, and that's, why, the occupation of Alcatraz in '69 was virtually very few California people and no Ohlone people were involved.
Dr. Babe, but
Yeah.
worked with
They,
Dr. Babe.
they didn't even, realize they were only Ohlone because they had learned it in school like everybody else did that the Ohlone were extinct. And then, there was a letter that came out after the occupation started that was sent to the president and saying, it's like, hey, we're here. And those people there are not speaking for us. The Ohlone were here, of course. It was a family that was not from San Francisco. It was actually from the East Bay. But, the people on the island didn't know that, because they went through the same school system that said, all the people were here, so we're going to do it for them. And we had to gradually over time, the last 50 plus years has been like, hey, we are still here. Even though Ramaytush is not in our homeland, we're nearby. I grew up and live in San Jose, and I commute in to do my sacred obligation. Jonathan and other people do, but that's not uncommon. There's lots of California people that are displaced from their natural homelands because those were the best places, right? Our ancestors knew how to pick a landscape, right? Creator knew how to create a landscape for us to take care of. And so those were the prime spots that everybody else wanted when they came here, so they pushed us out. That's the history of California. And we were confined to the less desirable parts of the state. Or were forced to leave entirely from our homelands to go elsewhere to survive, which is what happened to the Ramaytush. They went to the Central Valley, they went to the Salinas Valley, work in agriculture, and then spread out from there to other parts of California and even beyond. And we feel that because we're not connected to our homelands. I feel fortunate, working with Culture District, I'm working with all kinds of people that are thousands of miles away from their homelands. And, because they're multi-generational, some of them have never been to their homelands. I can, besides Ramaytush, I'm also Rumsen Ohlone from Monterey. My dad's Salinan people are south of that. I can jump in my car and be in my homelands, all three of my homelands, within 2 hours. And I do. And I do that as frequently as I can because it's important for us, if we have that opportunity, to be reconnected to our land. But failing that, we understand here in San Francisco, our relatives that have been relocated here need the land. They need that place, that way to connect into it. So some of the work we do is to, facilitate that in any way, like the garden that we hope to have in Golden Gate Park, some of the other consulting things that we do,
In Filoli,
work in Filoli, south of San Francisco, with the Cultural District. We gave our blessing to a program they have to bring people out to Black Point by Aquatic Park to do re-indigenize that part of the area, do indigenous planting. There is a little odd part of that. We do a lot of consulting work with ecological projects because none of us are here, so we only can consult. We can't get out there with shovels ourselves. We need the public, our relatives from other places, but the general public to be a part of that and take on that obligation and ownership of the place that they now have responsibility for. That's what we believe. They are here and they have responsibility for it because they benefit from being here in one way or the other. And in that process, we also try to share as best as we can in English our indigenous values that are literally 10,000 years old. Part of that is, we have a relationship with our land, and it's not just a physical object to us. This land we live on is a relative, and all the living things on it are relatives. Even if you don't have that belief, if you take on that attitude, how much different would the relationship be? How much different would the environment be if we had that attitude? Like, these are relatives. It's not just a stump. It's not just a tree that you can cut down and make a house out of. It's a relative. Our basket weavers that I've learned from tell us that when they're taught beginning basket weaving, they just don't run out and start pulling weeds to weave together. They go out and establish a relationship with the places they pick from. They find a place that they feel connected to, that seems to want them to be there, or at least allow them to be there. But it's not just a feeling, they actually ask. When they make that initial contact, then they ask, I would like to do this. Is that okay with you? Sounds odd, but not to us. Because we're asking an elder, right? Because the land has been here much longer than us. We're asking an elder, can we work with you?
Right.
And then the relationship begins, just like any other affirmative relationship with permission, is like, and then that obligates us to treat them well, to not overpick, to tend and cultivate in a way that makes it better. And over 10,000 years, longer, throughout California, we learned to do that. We didn't just, pick out weeds. We made the place better.
Mm-hmm.
And then because it's better, we benefit, right? It's a dynamic cycle that lasted for 10,000 years. We didn't need the Spaniards to come and save us. We had to save them.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, one of the things, though, is that when we talk about it, the word that comes up is we're doing ecological restoration. What does that really mean? Well, the example I use is I talked to a citizens group that's involved in a huge project over at the beach, right? To restore that. There's a huge project that's going to try to adjust climate change, sea level rise, all that kind of stuff. So they're going to put in part of the beach, they're going to put sand dunes, right? So they want to, what would you like to put on sand dunes, right? To make it look pretty. After they're done with sand dunes, that's the practical part. Now, what are you going to put there, right? You put magnolia trees or something like that. And we
Or
have to
ice plant.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. That's what they did before, and nobody likes that. But so they want to put something else there. It's like, but what was here before? If you're talking about restoration, it implies like you're going to put it back the way it was before, which they sort of grudgingly concede was better than what they have now. Just like, but do you realize it was just scrub brush, right? All the way up to almost where Cal Academy is, that whole area was all sand dunes, scrub brush. It's like, you want to put all the sand dunes back? You want to put scrub brush? So what I tend now to talk about is when we talk about, instead of using the word and term ecological restoration, I talk about healing the land. And what does that mean now, right? It doesn't necessarily mean removing stuff. That was something that throughout California, we've been talking about, invasive species abatement, that weird term. But we're also, an elder reminded me just a few years ago, it's like, wait a minute, they're relatives. They're relocated relatives.
hopefully to become allies, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So that's really the thing, is
yeah.
about being allies, right? So I'm a weaver, and I was trained pretty traditionally, not in this tradition, but it turns out there are a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
And that whole response to the plants is a big deal. I have 2 basketry ecology stories to share. One of them is that I used to work, I was on a board of directors for a thing, and one of the guys owned a big bunch of land down in near San Diego that they hadn't replaced. It's generational. They'd had it for a while, and they hadn't replaced any of those plants with anything else. And he said, well, you're a weaver. You want to come gather some stuff? I'm like, yeah, my tradition's from not here, but I do know some weavers from that area. So if you don't mind, I'll just give them your information. And he said, sure. And they went over there, and they said, well, we can't gather anything to weave the first year. We have to prepare the plants. So we have to crop them back the right way, and we have to do the things. So they did that. And that fall, a really big fire took out that part of outside of San Diego, and his house was the only one left standing on that hillside. And in large part, it was because there was nothing to catch, because the weavers had gone through and trimmed everything back and dealt with it in a traditional way. So there's nothing to catch for long enough to get the trees on fire, so it just went right past his house. So that's the first story.
And fire itself is one of the things we would have used, except it happened anyway.
Well, that was the cool thing, that the bear grass came back white because it had been burned down. It's one of the plants that they use in this part of the world. So the other thing is about maybe 20 years ago, maybe longer than 20 years ago, I'm getting old and forgetful, I had to do 3 more units to get my MFA. And so I went up to I was offered to go up and study in Yurok territory with a Yurok weaver, and they gave me units for it, which was fabulous. And basically, I was her gathering monkey for a couple of months, and it was great. It was big fun, but we ended up gathering some willow sticks for the kind of 1,000-stick baskets they do up there, and I have worked with willow. Willow is one of our materials. And I was like, wow, this willow is like stiff. It's really stiff. And she said, yeah. She said, it didn't used to be that way. Something changed. We know when things are changing if we're involved with the plants themselves. We can feel it, we can see it, we can smell it. It didn't feel like any willow I'd ever worked with. And I've worked with willow since I was, like, nobody knows, but probably about 3, 4. And it's not usually like that. And that's kind of a big deal. And I remember when California weavers started getting together to do weaving again. And one of the things that happened was you have to process the materials, as I said. So you have to like dig sedge root, and you have to replace things. And then you got to figure out where like the spotted dogweed stands are, and there's not that much of them, and you have to kind of figure it out. And you have to figure out where you can gather hazel and willow sticks and all of that. And for a while, the Park Service in California was not, let's say, friendly to all of that. But once it kind of got kicked off, and they stopped spraying Agent Orange on everybody's weaving materials that most of us hold in our mouths, it's really toxic, people got sick. Once they stopped doing that, what ended up happening was now you've got young moms who now have a child, right? So they're weaving these baskets. What are they weaving them for? They're weaving mush baskets, or weaving dance hats, or weaving things. So now you start doing it more, you see an uptick in a lot of cultural expression because now the equipment is available, right? And so now there are these kids, and they need sit cradles for the kids to be in while they're gathering and doing the thing. So now there's more sit cradles happening. And now you also need the words for all of these things in your language. And so language reclamation starts ramping up. And it's not like nobody was speaking the language. It's not like nobody was weaving. But once you start doing it in a group, once you start community basing these things, it
tends to be exponential.
It was, and I was there for that, and I got to watch all of that. So, one of the ways to be a good ally is to be a good ally in terms of the plants and the animals and all of the things. And that's an entire area of study. I mean, I literally have an MFA in basket weaving. That's what I got my degree in. I know that sounds like a joke, but it's not. That's what I did. And it's complicated and involved and multi-layered. And that is one of the traditional technologies that's involved in that.
And it may be one of the more complicated ones, and it's so comprehensive because you got to know all the stuff, right? You got to know, not just botany, you got to know biology, you got to know weather conditions, you got to know,
Chemistry
soil.
for the dyes.
Yeah, it's a complex indigenous science, and we're trying to emphasize that now. It's a science. It's just a different science than the modern European version of science, but it's comparable, and it's complementary. It can be. One of the things that we do with ARO, our nonprofit, is working with various organizations, including California Academy of Sciences and the Exploratorium. Exploratorium, we started a native festival, Native Homeland Festival a couple years ago, where we bring weavers who are indigenous, most important indigenous scientists to the Exploratorium, fourth Saturday of April, and all day they're demonstrating. And then we have panel discussions. Our very first one was 3 years ago, and one of the people I know, her name's Lois, she's been spending over 40 years of her life doing super brushes. So I was at her table, and she had like 15 soap root brushes there, and one of them was her grandmother's. She said, so it's like 100 years old, and it's still functional. Still, she uses it. It's not in a shelf or something. She uses it still, and it's a little worn on the brushes. It's a little worn in the handle, but it's still functional and intact. And then there are some other ones that are newer, and including a small portion of them, maybe about a quarter of them, in the handle that's made from the pulp of the soap root plant. There was little cracks, and for experienced, they know how to avoid that. So I thought that these were like maybe her grandkids were like they were practice brushes. So I was thinking, oh, how cute! Your grandkids did these. She goes, no, I did. So, oh, I'm sorry. She goes, no. It's been doing that the last 7 years.
That's it.
He said, I can't, I've adapted, I've changed, I've, tried different techniques, all the things that thousands of years have taught basket weavers how to adapt to changing conditions. We were not static, frozen in time or in knowledge. We understood different climates, different soil conditions, different weather patterns, different water flow would always change. And there was techniques developed over generations to adapt to those changes. She was using those and it wasn't working. And that's what bothered her. She didn't even want to talk about it. It's like last 7 years, all of a sudden, like a year or two after I make it, they start cracking. She says, the plants are sick. That's just burned into my brain. She says, the soap root plants are sick. We had a panel that day and we were going to talk about basket weave in general. I said, you need to say that. And that was transformative to our panel and the work we did with Exploratorium. We even brought in Cal Academy. We're trying to put together a project to help these basket weavers understand why. They see the effects because they're intimately involved with the plants. Like I said, it's a relative that they've known for generations. They can see the difference. They don't know why because it's such a different change that their cultural history doesn't explain to them. Everybody assumes, and I'm sure they're right, that it's climate change. But what does that mean at the cellular level? And is there anything that can be done to, adapt to that? That's where indigenous science kind of stops, and we're trying to engage modern science to help with their tools to take it that next step further, because we believe it is complementary science. There was a Eastern elder from Canada that called it two-eyed seeing. It's not folklore. It's science, indigenous science, based on thousands of years of direct, contact and data collection and experience.
I always call it play testing for the baskets. They work really well because it's thousands of years of play testing.
Yeah.
We're at the hour up, shockingly. The two of us never, ever have a conversation that lasts this short a period of time, I have to say. But I would book events with you monthly just to be able to talk to you.
and maybe get through the topic.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I think we covered a lot of the topic. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you to Mike for being the AV guy. Thank you to John for helping to support this. I'm grateful to the way that the San Francisco Public Library has been an ally to the various communities of Native people.
Yes.
And it's good to see you, man. You got to come over for dinner.
Yeah, we didn't even get to half of the subject we talked about before. And like I said, I haven't seen you since the last panel.
I know, it's terrible. Well, part of it's that we're all sort of employed in doing this really important work and trying to convince people it's important. But anyway, can we have a round of applause for Gregg Castro?
And Ken, Poet Laureate. Thank you.
Well,